I'm John McKee, editor of Messianic Apologetics. Messianicapologetics.net. And I would like to welcome you to this episode of Messianic Insider, your theology and news roundup for September the 25th, 2025. A few days ago, we remembered Rosh Hashanah, the Feast of Trumpets. We are presently in the middle of the 10 days of awe leading up to Yom Kippur, or the Day of Atonement. Yom Kippur will begin next Thursday evening, so that's in 1 week. Certainly right now there are many things, which are weighing very heavily upon us as the people of God. As individuals looking back on the past year or so, what God has in store for us for the next year, and also what is taking place in our world. I woke up this morning with a huge amount of news items to sort through, and so we're going to be getting into that, of course, later on. But we are reminded, number one, pray for peace. Israel, Gaza, the Middle East, release of the hostages. Number two, pray for peace. Russia, Ukraine, Europe now. And of course, number three, pray for reason and sanity to prevail here on the American home front. And just in general, pray for peace in the world, that God's shalom would be able to specially reach to his servants, because we are living in very dark and unstable times. All right, so we do have an important theology roundup. Yesterday, we discussed, because during Rosh Hashanah, there are a lot of different scripture readings. Many of them pertain not only to the blowing of the trumpet, but also to the resurrection of the dead. What does the Tanakh teach about death? Where do the dead go? They go to Sheol. Is Sheol the grave, or is it the netherworld? So we got into some of that yesterday, and continuing in that motif, we're going to be discussing something from John chapter 3. All right, so our teaching, just like yesterday, is taken from our ministry publication, Messianics and the Afterlife. It's available in both paperback as well as ebook for Amazon Kindle. Now let me switch screens really quickly, and we'll get into our teaching. The teaching is going to be rather short compared to yesterday, because we do have a lot of news to go through. All right, there we go. We're going to be discussing John 3, verses 12 and 13. And frequently, one of the things you encounter from many people, especially on social media, definitely in the Hebrew roots sphere of influence, even in one law or pronomia now, is the claim that no one has ascended to heaven except Yeshua. And John 3, the passage we're about to get into, is frequently invoked as this. So what do we do about this passage if you do not believe in complete unconsciousness between death and the resurrection, and you actually do believe that a born-again believer, his or her consciousness goes to another dimension to be with the Lord after death? Obviously, this is a passage which has to be examined. And indeed, as I have concluded, this is a passage which has been taken out of context from what the actual scene is. John 3, verses 12 and 13, Yeshua said, "If I told you earthly things and you do not believe, how will you believe if I tell you heavenly things? No one has ascended into heaven but he who descended from heaven, the Son of Man." New American Standard. Psychopanicus, those who believe in what's more popularly called soul sleep, the idea that a human being goes into complete unconsciousness between death and resurrection, commonly argue from John 3:13 that no one has ascended into heaven, and thus it is futile for those who believe in an intermediate afterlife to hold to such a conviction. However, if their conclusion about this is correct, then it could be taken as a nullification of Enoch being translated up, Genesis 5:24, as well as Elijah being taken into heaven via a chariot, 2 Kings 2:11. The vantage point of the statements made by Yeshua has to be considered, because psychopanicus have based their conclusions without carefully reading the text. Yeshua himself, within the narrative of the fourth gospel, had yet to ascend into heaven, John 20, verse 17. Yeshua clearly did this, Acts 1:9. And so there is a definite problem of reading John 3:13 from a static position of no one on earth ever having gone into heaven. The subject matter being discussed is witnessed to be disbelief in what the Messiah said and who had actually brought information from heaven, not what happens after death. In this scene, Yeshua told Nicodemus that if he did not believe in the earthly things of which he spoke, things which concerned a dimension and a state of being which he and others had all experienced and was common to them, then Yeshua's listeners would surely not believe things about an extra-dimensional state of being in heaven which they had never experienced. John 3:12, except only him. Yeshua's assertions were actually designed to point to the ignorance and faithlessness which his audience commonly suffered from, not the post-mortem state of the deceased. They did not possess the confidence to accept his words about the realities they knew about on earth, much less realities they did not know about in heaven. Yeshua had not yet ascended to heaven at this point in John chapter 3, but he had clearly once been in heaven as the pre-incarnate Son of God. Yeshua's word about no one has ascended into heaven but he who descended from heaven, John 3:13, New American Standard, is best viewed in light of ancient Jewish opinions and speculations about Tanakh figures having ascended into heaven, then coming back to earth to deliver divine secrets. Yeshua discounted these as being true, as he was the only one authorized to bring humanity messages and information directly from heaven. Colin G. Cruz explains this in his commentary on John. Quote, Jesus identified himself as the heavenly figure of great sovereign authority, the Son of Man who came down from heaven and therefore was qualified to speak authoritatively of heavenly things. At the same time, he rejected all Jewish speculations about other revealers who were thought to have ascended to heaven, e.g. Abraham, Moses, Enoch, and Isaiah, to return with revelations for those on earth. Proverbs 30, verse 4, unquote. Yeshua the Messiah is the only one who descended from heaven, unlike those who may have been thought to have ascended into heaven and returned with information from this realm. The New Living Translation captures this well in its paraphrase. No one has ever gone to heaven and returned. And when the Apostle Paul described being taken up into heaven in an out-of-body experience, he was clear that he could not report on the things which he had seen. 2 Corinthians 12, 3 and 4. In order to believe the heavenly things which Yeshua would disclose to people in his teachings, extreme faith must be exhibited. And many people could not even believe in the earthly things Yeshua would talk about. Yeshua is the only one who has truly experienced the extra-dimensional realities of heaven and has come to earth to speak about them to human beings, having emptied himself of glory and taking on human flesh. Philippians 2, 5 through 11. So this is a passage, and we haven't done a huge extensive analysis of this, but when you hear someone says, well, no one has ascended into heaven, have they looked at the wider context of Yeshua's statements? He's talking about how his ancient audience would not easily accept the things he talked about pertaining to the earth. So if they were unable to easily accept or understand the things he was talking about pertaining to the earth, how could they be able to understand the heavenly realities of which he spoke? Because no one has ascended into heaven except the Son of Man who descended from heaven. No one has ascended into heaven, i.e., and brought information back from heaven. The only one you can rely on is the Son of God who descended from heaven. It has nothing to do with the post-mortem state in that passage. Once again, and let's switch windows back. This is taken from our ministry publication, Messianics and the Afterlife, which goes into a lot of information. And I'll be the first person to tell you, the ultimate intended trajectory for the redeemed in Messiah is not dying and floating off to heaven, sitting on a cloud and playing some harp. It is to be in a fully embodied, immortal state at the resurrection. So I think it is a misnomer to think that people who believe in a temporary, disembodied afterlife somehow deny the future doctrine of resurrection. That is actually not true. And when you get into this whole issue of the doctrine of resurrection itself, which is a Pharisaical doctrine, it comes from the Second Temple Pharisees, right? Everyone recognizes that in Judaism. I mean, Paul himself, when he was on trial before the Sanhedrin, I'm a Pharisee and I'm on trial for the resurrection of the dead. The very Jewish sect which formulated the doctrine of resurrection, the cornerstone of our belief in Yeshua, that he was resurrected from the dead. The Pharisees, they also believed in an intermediate afterlife, in another dimension between death and the resurrection. So that's something which is commonly not factored in some of these debates. And indeed, as I have looked at this subject over the years, no one has ascended into heaven from John 3. It's like, it's not talking about what happens after death. It's describing how there were many people in Second Temple Judaism, certainly affluent throughout Second Temple literature, who believed that different humans went up into heaven and then came back with secrets. Yeshua is saying, no, I am the only one who has actually been in heaven and brought down information from heaven. That's the context of the passage we've just described, we've just reviewed. All right, so I hope that this is something very helpful. It gets you to think a little more deeply because this is an important subject for a lot of people, especially this time of year. All right, so now we're going to get into some news, and there are some very important things happening in the world right now. Now, we do the news roundup after the theology roundup because, of course, the news is something which is time sensitive and it changes from day to day. I sincerely hope, although everyone's experience is different, that when you remembered Rosh Hashanah, the Feast of Trumpets, someone in your congregation or synagogue issued some kind of a prayer for what is happening in Israel and the Middle East and what is happening in the world. Because this year, the fall high holidays are aligned with UN General Assembly gatherings. They typically are. But we've got a number of countries which have already recognized Western countries an independent state of Palestine. And of course, along with that, today, I woke up to some very dramatic news events. And this is something, of course, which is new for our ministry as of this year, going 5 times a week with Messianic Insider. We started that right after Passover. And we're doing it so we can remain grounded. Because how many people are not paying attention and then there's some dramatic event and they think, oh, the sky is falling, the sky is falling, it's all going to come down. The shit's going to hit the fan, because their messianic leaders are not up to date with what is going on. So that's why we're doing this. And it's not just to examine events in terms of the Middle East or Russia, Ukraine, or here on the American home front, or Asia, or wherever it is. It's also to check into what's happening in the religious world, to check into what's happening with the growth of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. And indeed, there are a lot of people out there in positions of leadership and influence. I'm sorry, they are afraid. We have access as believers to the infinite powers of heaven. We have access as believers who know Yeshua, are spiritually regenerated. We have access to, Lord, we need protection. Lord, we need answers. And we've got access to more information than anyone on planet Earth has ever had. And indeed, some of these things, a number of the channels on X I follow, they have open source in their name. So they're not like, fringe right, fringe left. I mean, this is stuff which is out there. People can, with a little bit of investigation, find it. Okay. So all the information I'm about to go through, all the news stories, those of you who watch, you listen, you've heard this before. The links will be available later today when this episode is archived at messianicapologetics.net. So you can go read the articles yourself, watch the news clips, etc. All right, so we start out with this story from yesterday, Visegrad 24. Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov meets with U.S. Secretary of State Rubio in New York. This is the time, of course, the UN General Assembly, different world leaders go to New York, and they meet regarding the different situations in the world. And in this case, it has to do with the Russia-Ukraine situation, which is an ongoing story. And I know that we all need to be praying for peace between Russia and Ukraine. This past Rosh Hashanah, sorting through the different people I was interacting with, we don't hear a lot of talk about the Russia-Ukraine situation in the Messianic community, because after North America, where the largest Messianic Jewish community is located, the second largest Messianic Jewish community is in Ukraine. And then the third largest is in Russia. But we don't have to get into the politics, who did what, who didn't do what, to know that we have brothers and sisters in Eastern Europe, Messianic Jewish brothers and sisters in Eastern Europe, who are in the crossfire of a very destructive conflict, and that we have a responsibility to pray for peace and for their safety, regardless of what side of the border they are on. Excuse me. All right, our next story. This came across my feed on X. There's a 1 minute, 32-second clip. This is from Bill Maher, passed on by Vivid. Israel is the Jews' homeland, and Jews have always lived there. You can look it up. It's in this book called The Bible. Calling Jews colonizers is like calling Native Americans colonizers here. It's ridiculous. Indeed, you are seeing a growth of people, even in the Christian world, not just on the left, but even on the right. Today's Jewish people have no connection to the Jews or Israelites of the Bible. Now, of course, it's true that, do they have 100% correlation to the Jews or Israelites of the Bible? Guess what? No one has 100% correlation with any ethnic group from 2 millennia ago. Nobody does. But they've got, because the Jewish community is very closed, or has been very closed to itself throughout history, they've got more of a genetic connection to the Jews and Israelites of the biblical period than most other ethnic groups have to their forebearers. But yeah, this is going to be a huge discussion and debate. It's only going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. Okay, this is something which has been circulating across different news venues, social media. This is the first one I saw from Benny Johnson. There's a 25-second clip with it. First look at President Trump's new presidential wall of fame at the White House. Some of you all might be familiar with how at 10 Downing Street, where the residence of the British Prime Minister, up one of the major staircases, there are all these portraits of all the prime ministers going back to the early 1700s. And when there's a new prime minister, all the portraits then adjust with a new portrait added. So to have something on the White House premises where you have portraits of all the presidents going back to George Washington, that only makes logical sense. But here, of course, when you get to the last several presidents, there you see President Obama, there you see President Trump, his first term, and then you see Joe Biden, and rather than having a portrait of Joe Biden, you have this picture of an auto pen signing his name. Okay, this is going to raise a lot of questions for certain, a lot of criticism of President Trump, but it's going to raise a lot of what's going on here, right? And I think that's been done on purpose for what Trump intends to highlight in the future regarding the previous administration. Whether you like that or not, whether you think it's unnecessary trolling or not, this is something which is going to stimulate a huge amount of attention and questions. All right, from Fox News yesterday, September the 24th. Minting legacy. House Republicans plan to introduce a bill this week directing the U.S. Treasury to mint 400,000 silver dollar coins bearing Charlie Kirk's likeness. Okay, so Charlie Kirk could be placed on U.S. currency under new House GOP proposal. All right, this kind of thing, of course, does happen from time to time. There's a notable American, and they're going to end up with their face on some form of currency or commemorative coin. Okay, I understand that. But to me, and this is my opinion, you're free to disagree, this is Kirkolatry. Okay, and I don't think Charlie Kirk, if he really was a strong believer and he really did want to see social change, I don't think this is the kind of thing he would have really approved of. Because of his service and wanting to ask questions, he would probably have said there are dozens of other Americans, hundreds of other Americans, who are far more worthy and far more notable than I. Release another series of commemorative coins with George and Martha Washington. I think he would have said something like that. But, as we continue to evaluate and sort through Charlie Kirk's legacy, which is, of course, a long-term thing, there are going to be these kinds of moments which are, in my opinion, Kirkolatry. All right, from Open Source Intel, this is yesterday, September the 24th. Steve Witkoff on Gaza war. We're hopeful, and I might say even confident, that in the coming days we'll be able to announce some sort of breakthrough. Yes, we do continue to pray for the release of the hostages. We continue to pray and lift up to the Lord the conclusion of this conflict, the disbanding of Hamas. We know that things are going to get very interesting because you hear one thing from this person, you hear something else from another person. You have the recognition of Palestine by countries, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, France, various others. But they say, we're not going to open up an embassy. We're not going to open up some kind of diplomatic mission until Hamas is disbanded, disarmed, leaves, and the hostages are released. Then we hear Israel's going to annex more of Judea and Samaria. And then you hear, various Arab countries, this is going to terminate, or it's going to stifle the Abraham Accords. UAE maybe will pull their ambassador, maybe will terminate diplomatic relations. I mean, you see all of this, all of these different positions, all these different opinions. So please continue to pray for peace in the region, which leads us to this next story. This is from Sky News on X, formerly Twitter, yesterday. Islamic NATO in the making. Why Saudi-Pakistan deal could be game-changing. Indeed, this is something which is huge. Now, we know that this came out of the Doha summit after Israel bombed Hamas headquarters in Qatar, and then all these Arab and Muslim leaders got together, and then all of a sudden, Pakistan and Saudi Arabia signed this mutual defense treaty. Is it something which is going to expand into an Islamic Arab NATO-style arrangement? And of course, along with that, people then speculate about things like Isaiah 17, Ezekiel 38. Obviously, we don't know, but we do know things are shifting in the Middle East. We do know that. To the American home front, and there are a number of places which have reported this. This is from yesterday afternoon, September the 24th. There's a 1 minute, 28-second clip here. Open source intel, the clips from CNBC. Open source intel, former FBI Director James Comey is reportedly expected to face indictment in the coming days. Okay, so yeah, this is serious. We know that as things are happening in the Middle East, Russia, Ukraine, that there are also things here on the American home front we have to keep in mind. Russiagate, Epstein, now we have the Charlie Kirk assassination. What's going to be next? I mean, and what's going to result from all of this here at home? What's going to result from all of this is whether you're on the right or whether you're on the left or the center, people's trust in government, people's trust in celebrities, persons of note, industry, entertainment, sports, whatever it is going to plummet. Who can I trust? Who doesn't have some skeleton in their closet, right? You can trust the Lord. You can cry out to him and he will answer. All right, here's something which came across my feed on Instagram. It's from the channel The Rift. That's Elijah Schaffer. And this is something which we have to be aware of as it concerns growing anti-Semitism in our world. Elijah Schaffer, he's got another post we're going to go into in just a moment. But this is from someone on his channel. In a 1985 New York Magazine profile, the Bachelor billionaire Lex Wexner, obviously Jewish, describes a debuk, hope I pronounced that properly, a Jewish folklore spirit as a driving force behind his relentless ambition to build the limited empire. He recounts his influence since childhood, its dramatic return in 1977, and its role in his business success, saying it looks like me when it faces him. So basically, what is being concluded from this post on the Rift is that high-level Jewish people are directed by demonic spirits or demons, and by extension, consultation with some kind of dark demonic forces is integral to a great deal, if not all, of historical Jewish practice. That's what this thing is coming out with. Now, it's got to be noted fairly throughout religious history, whether it's Judaism, Christianity, or even Islam. There's always been a Jewish mystical tradition. There's been a Christian mystical tradition. There has been an Islamic mystical tradition. So some of this is not new to religious history. But in the hands of anti-Semites, this is the kind of thing which can be used to castigate all Jews as being servants of the devil. They use some kind of a hexagram, some kind of a weird star. And, you know, you've got things like Kabbalah, you've got things like this or that. And, you know, it just feeds this anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism. Israel's behind all the bad things in the world. We got a few of those stories we got to go through. And what do we do as the Messianic community? You know, there are stories of people, I know, and I've seen them, non-Jewish believers. They come into the Messianic community because they want to connect to things like Yeshua in the feasts, Shabbat, you know, Torah study. And, you know, they're very, very open-minded. And, you know, they get into things that they probably shouldn't, and they go overboard. Christianity's got all this paganism in it, and then all of a sudden they discover something like this, and the Messianic Jewish leadership frequently doesn't know what to do, and frequently doesn't have the courage to say, look, yeah, there is a Kabbalistic tradition out there. There's a Jewish mystical tradition out there. It's a negative influence. It is by far not the majority, not even the minority, not even a small minority of the Jewish community. It's on the fringe. And we at this Messianic congregation condemn that, as many rabbis throughout history have. Many are unable to do that because it could be seen as a sign of disloyalty to one's people. And you know what? In light of that vacuum, then there are various non-Jewish people. They leave the Messianic community, and then they get into, Israelite identity. The Jewish people of today are not the Jewish people of the Bible. Ashkenazi Jews are Khazar imposters. And all of a sudden, they start embracing a lot of the crap that a Candace Owens or even a Tucker Carlson now has been entertaining. So in the future, today's Messianic community, Messianic Jewish leaders, when they see something like this, they need to condemn it immediately and recognize, look, our people have a broad and complicated history like everyone else, and there's some people in the Jewish community who are involved in things they have no business being involved in, and call something like this out for what it is: witchcraft, spiritism, demonism, whatever it is. And look, it's not as though everyone in Christianity hasn't looked into these kinds of things either. Look at some of the royal families of Europe, royal courts in Europe. They had court astrologers, they had court numerologists. They were involved in witchcraft, the occult, etc. So this is not isolated just to the Jewish community. Everyone has been affected by the negative influence of sin. But this is the kind of information in the wrong hands can do damage to Jewish-Christian relations. It can do damage to support for Israel, etc. All right, our next story. This is from this is from Newsmax yesterday on Instagram. Trump, we want to end the war in Gaza. President Donald Trump outlined a comprehensive plan to end the Gaza war, secure the release of hostages, and establish post-conflict governance under non-Hamas leadership during a multilateral meeting with leaders of 8 Arab and Muslim countries, according to Arab diplomats cited by the Times of Israel. Now, of course, along with this, some of the information which is also circulating, and maybe this is purposeful confusion, maybe it's not, will President Trump permit the government of the state of Israel to annex at least parts of Judea and Samaria? We're hearing claims, or we've heard claims, yes, other claims, no. We will have to wait and see, of course. All right, here's an important story. This is from Open Source Intel. Yesterday, September the 24th, Spanish Prime Minister Sanchez announced that he will send a Navy vessel to escort the Gaza flotilla. In a press statement, he said, the Spanish government insists on upholding international law and ensuring its citizens' right to sail the Mediterranean under safe conditions. He added, tomorrow, a naval patrol ship equipped with all necessary means will depart from Cartagena, ready to assist the flotilla or carry out a rescue operation if needed. So, with the Gaza flotilla, of course, we talked yesterday about Greta Thunberg and others who were involved with this. The Spanish government's going to send a naval escort. And many people are taking note of this. While the Spanish government's willing to do this, the Spanish government and various others did relatively nothing to stop the Houthis in Yemen. And of course, while the Houthis in Yemen have been engaged in attacking Israel, the Houthis in Yemen are also a direct threat to the trade routes going through the Red Sea. And along with that, not just goods traveling from Asia to Europe and North America, but also the supply of oil and gas going from the Middle East to Europe and even to the Americas. So, yeah. And of course, a government like Spain relies on that critical trade route. So obviously, we'll wait and see what more comes from the Gaza flotilla. On to our next story. Okay, this is from Visegrad 24 yesterday. As Iceland is preparing to hold a referendum on joining the EU, the union's greatest proponent of federalization and a United States of Europe, Guy Verhofstadt, he's from Belgium, former prime minister, has traveled to Iceland to speak about why he thinks Iceland must join the union and the EU to become a state. Now, I know that there are a lot of people who have questions about the future of the EU. What's it going to become? Is it just going to be some kind of an unofficial association? I mean, it isn't official, but just kind of a loose association, I should say. Or is it going to eventually become a full-fledged United States of Europe, with some even having claimed it's going to be a revived Roman Empire, the last great power on earth? Now, in recent days, particularly over the past 10 to 15 years, there's been some shifting of the pendulum away from people looking at the last great empire being a United States of Europe, a revived Roman Empire. In no small part due to some of the publications of Joel Richardson, who promotes more of an Islamic beast, because a huge number of Islamic countries were also part of the old Roman Empire. Okay, there's nothing wrong with making that conclusion, but we also have to pay attention to these kinds of statements. A country like Iceland, of course, relatively on its own, in the North Atlantic, does, of course, sit as a potential candidate for EU membership. Is there going to be a United States of Europe? I don't know. Is there even going to be a revived Roman Empire in Western Europe? I don't know. But I do know we have to pay attention, and these kinds of things are noteworthy. All right, here's an uncomfortable story which is getting a lot of publicity. Tucker Carlson making claims about 9/11 and the involvement of Israel in one form or another. So here is a post from the Misfit Patriot. I have had my disagreements with his channel, but I've also had my agreements with his channel as well. Tucker Carlson, he says, Israel did 9/11 to drag us into war with Iraq. And he says Israel, and then reposts this article from August the 29th, 2007. Israel warned U.S. not to invade Iraq after 9/11. And this is not the only story which is circulating about this. We got a few others. All right, so our next story, and this is from David Riaboy, Late Republic Nonsense. That's his channel. But here he says, total lie. In fact, Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon told Bush not to invade Iraq because Iran was a far bigger threat. Sick, evil, S-H-I-T, according to him. And he posts the Tucker Carlson clip that's 2 minutes, 29 seconds. In his opinion, it's repulsive seeing people who know better become strategic autists when it comes to Tucker's insanity about Jews in Israel. He's constantly given the benefit of the doubt, as every sentence is divorced from the context of his totalizing obsession. So Tucker Carlson has been saying that America started preparing for war with Iraq immediately after September 11th at the behest of a foreign government, Israel. So in the view of many, it's the government of Israel somehow behind 9/11, or they capitalized on 9/11 so that the U.S. would go to war in Iraq. But that is something which is being challenged directly, that no, the Israeli government did not want to see the U.S. go to war in Iraq because Iran was the much bigger threat, in their opinion. And here we have a post from David M. Friedman. He was the former ambassador to Israel during the first Trump term. And this is what his opinion is. Hey, Tucker Carlson, who are the people saying that Netanyahu is running around the Middle East telling people that he controls Donald Trump? You say it's a fact. Well, prove it then. All I can say is that, number one, I know Netanyahu better than most, and I have never heard him say anything remotely like that. And two, he hasn't run anywhere around the Middle East in years. He's been home fighting a war. So, along with along with Israel apparently at least capitalizing on 9/11, manipulating the U.S. to go to war in Iraq, that's not true. They saw Iran as the greater threat. Here, and this is a 1 minute 57 clip, where Tucker Carlson is claiming that Netanyahu controls Donald Trump. And David Friedman is saying, no, that's not true. Netanyahu's never said that. You've got to prove where this information comes from. And number two, he spends most of his time in Israel because he's having to fight this war, especially since October the 7th. So yeah, there are a lot of uncomfortable things, a lot of misinformation, which is being circulated right now in no small part due to a Tucker Carlson. And yes, I know a lot of people, especially in light of Charlie Kirk's recent death, Tucker Carlson was present on the stage at his memorial service, and he's going to be present at various turning point events. They don't like that. And I know that Tucker Carlson, Charlie Kirk, when you see clips about him describing, yeah, I don't agree with Candace, but she's still a friend. And he'd probably say the same thing about Tucker Carlson. That's not how I would have acted toward Candace Owens or Tucker Carlson. The way I would have acted if they were my friends and then they went off the deep end, it's like, look, I'm sorry you've gone this way, but we can no longer be friends. You have crossed a red line here. That's my value system at work. And people know that, people who have known me in the past know that, when they crossed a red line, like, for example, on some of the afterlife issues, no, it's not a salvation issue. Our faith doesn't rise or fall on it, but it's important to me as someone who was at the deathbed of my father and saw him leave this dimension. It's important to me as it involves the uniqueness of the human being compared or contrasted to the animals. I've broken fellowship over this issue with some people. And we all have our, rate of threshold. But yeah, these things which Tucker Carlson has been reported as saying Israel was behind 9/11, or more likely, Israel capitalized on 9/11 to manipulate the U.S. to go to war in Iraq. Not true. They saw Iran as the greater threat. Netanyahu controls Donald Trump. Where's your proof of this? That's not true. And who else is going to jump on the bandwagon with some of these things? All right, here's an important clip. Also in the same vein, but it has to do more with, did the Jews really reject Jesus or not? This is a 1 minute 54 second clip with Dinesh D'Souza. The early Christians in Jerusalem and Galilee met in synagogues. They were Jews who followed Jesus, also known as Judeo-Christians. Dinesh D'Souza tells TRHL official that he aims to elevate the conversation about Judeo-Christianity to counter the narratives presented by Nick Fuentes. Okay, so there are a lot of claims out there, of course, along with the growing anti-Semitism, growing anti-Zionism, about first century Christianity. Were there any Jewish believers at all in Jesus as Messiah? Did the first century Christians completely break with Second Temple Judaism or not? And it's going to be rather fascinating to see how this has to come out within this ideological conflict which has been taking place. And how ready is today's Messianic Jewish movement for this? Because this is the kind of place where some Messianic Jewish leaders could step up, say something. Look, the first believers in Yeshua were Jewish. They observed the Sabbath. They observed the festivals of Israel. They ate kosher. They circumcised their sons. They saw themselves as a part of the Jewish community, the Jewish people. And they looked at the arrival of Yeshua, Jesus, as the arrival of all of their hopes for Israel. And you see in the New Testament that the Jewish believers, they are an integral part of the Jewish community. And they continue to participate in the traditions and customs of the Jewish people. I mean, this is rather rudimentary to a lot of us, but to a lot of people out there in the realm of evangelicalism even, it's not as familiar. But how much of this is going to be forced because of the times in which we are living? So we'll see what Dinesh D'Souza does. Hopefully he'll be able to make a difference where a difference is needed. Okay, from Open Source Intel earlier today, September the 25th. Macron, that is Emmanuel Macron, the president of France. Trump promised me that if Israel annexes the West Bank, it will be a red line for the U.S. and the end of the Abraham Accords. Okay, we know this is the kind of information we need to pay attention to. There have been people in the U.S. administration who have said, look, if Israel wants to annex Judea and Samaria in response to recognition of the state of Palestine, they're free to do so. Others may not be saying that. So is that confusion on purpose? We'll wait and see. We know, just going back with what we've seen this year, there have been purposeful, Trump and Netanyahu aren't in agreement, and then all of a sudden, we've got the 12-day war, and then we have Trump announcing that he's sending bombers to take out, or he has sent bombers to take out Iranian nuclear facilities. We just have to keep that in mind. All right, from Ynet Global, and this is on September the 24th. Netanyahu's going after Tucker Carlson. Netanyahu slams ex-Fox News host Tucker Carlson. He has no idea of history. So here we see Netanyahu saying, he hit back at Tucker Carlson after the former Fox News host questioned Jewish ties to biblical Israel, accusing him of siding with America's enemies and misunderstanding Jewish and Middle Eastern history. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu hit back at former Fox News host Tucker Carlson, saying the American conservative commentator has no clue about history after questioning whether Jews in modern Israel are descendants of the biblical Israelites. Okay, now, they are descendants of the biblical Israelites, but to argue that they are the exact same as the biblical Israelites, no one is the exact same as their ancestors were from 2 millennia ago. Okay, so to continue just some of this, of course, there's no doubt about it, Netanyahu said. The Jews dispersed from this land to Europe, to the Middle East, to other places. But we never forgot this land. We always said next year in Jerusalem. My great-grandfather came here in the 19th century. Most of the Palestinians who live here came after he did. Okay, and there's some more you can read through this, but it's a good rebuttal to Tucker Carlson. Okay, we're going to change gears. This involves some of the things we are seeing in the conflict in Europe. Okay, this is from today, September the 25th on Visegrad 24. Denmark is considering to invoke NATO Article 4 after a series of drone incursions. Denmark announces it's considering to invoke NATO Article 4 after a second night of unknown drones shutting down several airports. 4 airports were targeted last night. Okay, so NATO Article 4, of course, this has come up because of Russian drones in Poland, and then the Russian Air Force in Estonia, now drones in Denmark. NATO Article 4 is not when a NATO country gets attacked, then all of the NATO countries are to act as though they were attacked. It's instead when there's been a possible incursion into a NATO member's territory, then there's a consultation of the NATO members regarding, okay, what took place and what does this represent, and some kind of an investigation into it. So it's a problem. It's a concern. It's an alert. To see NATO Article 4 talked about so frequently as it has been the past few weeks, that is concerning. Okay, back to Netanyahu, and this is also from Ynet Global. This is from September the 24th, yesterday. Report: Trump says he won't let Netanyahu annex West Bank as U.S. drafts Gaza post-war plan. Okay, we know that we've heard a lot of different claims about what's going to happen with Gaza. How are we going to see this end? In addition to meeting with Trump at the White House, Netanyahu will address the UN, and he's already in New York by now, confront criticism over the war in Gaza and the failed Qatar strike, and hold talks on a possible security agreement with Syria amid continued U.S. brokered negotiations. Okay, so yeah, we all know, especially now with all these countries which have recognized an independent Palestine, that this is reaching some kind of a point event. We don't know any timetables. We don't want to be presumptuous, but we know we are in the fall high holidays. Going back 2 years to October the 7th, that was on Shemini Atzeret, Simchat Torah. So it was an association with a very holy season for observant Jews. We need to be paying attention all the time. But we also need to be paying attention, especially at times like this. All right, this is something which I woke up to hearing about this morning. Got 7 more stories to go through. South Park is at it again. Okay, I'm going to scroll down here. This is the clip from South Park, which is being circulated. This is 34 seconds, but you can probably encounter it on a number of different platforms by now. Okay, this is from the X channel, Beitar Worldwide. Last night, South Park aired a segment ending with an American Jewish mother storming into the office of the Israeli prime minister, blaming him for flattening neighborhoods, killing thousands, and most outrageously, accusing him of making life for American Jews impossible. The scene ends with Hasidic music playing mockingly in the background, turning Jewish identity into a punchline. Okay, and some of you all probably watched South Park at some point or another. I admit I saw it when I was in high school as well. It was worse than The Simpsons. It also had the F word in it frequently. According to Beitar Worldwide, South Park cloaks its hatred behind a Jewish character, Sheila Broflovsky, a tired stereotype of the nagging, overbearing diaspora Jew, to give cover for their slander. It's not new. It's not edgy. It's not brave. It's just lazy anti-Semitism. So, and then their opinion, there is no bigger enemy of the state of Israel than the diaspora Jewish liberal. Okay, so I recommend, just like a number of months ago, South Park did this with Donald Trump, nude in bed with Satan. Those of you who saw the South Park movie back in 1998, it was Saddam Hussein nude in bed with Satan. Now they're going after Netanyahu, and this is just going to really infuriate a lot of people on either side. It's just going to inflame anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism. What's the state of Israel doing? They do have the right of free speech, but so do we. And those of us who recognize the growing anti-Semitism, growing anti-Zionism, we got to take note of this, and we've got to be aware that, kids especially are with their electronic devices. They're going to be seeing this, and they're going to be influenced by this. So, with Yom Kippur coming up, a number of you at your Messianic congregations and synagogues, you had a lost opportunity to comment about what's going on in the Middle East. Yom Kippur is going to be here in a week. Are you going to do anything on Yom Kippur? Are you going to raise awareness of these kinds of issues? I hope you will. Now, here's something which has really got me very upset. I'll just say it. I'm really pissed off about this one. This is from Elijah Schaefer's X feed. Of course, he's someone who is involved with the Rift. If you remember a few moments ago, we mentioned that Jewish individual who has a demonic entity who he consults for motivation, what have you. This is the guy who's behind the Rift. This is what he says. And he's somebody who clips the edges of Christian nationalism. He actually says this. Can we finally admit we lost World War II? Which means what? It means that the side which should have won were the Axis. And the Axis were probably right, in his opinion. And along with that, the Axis were probably right to enact various anti-Semitic laws. But, of course, the Jewish community has inflated this total fiction of 6 million who perished in the Holocaust. Yeah, this kind of talk is alive and well, damnably so, in the year 2025. And it is appealing to a lot of the younger crowd, which did not grow up going to church, doesn't have any kind of biblical connection with even ancient Israel, and is just, sucking on all of the BS from a lot of social media. But we are here to pay attention to these things, to watch for the signs of the times, and to know how to adjust accordingly. Okay, so we got a lot of very concerning things here with the Russia-Ukraine conflict and here on the American home front. This is what really upset me this morning, as it should you as well. Okay, Visegrad 24 this morning, 9:16 a.m., September the 25th. U.S. fighter jets scramble to intercept Russian warplanes near Alaska. NORAD said 2 Russian Tu-95 long-range strategic bombers and 2 Su-35 fighter jets were flying in the Alaskan Air Defense Identification Zone. The U.S. deployed 4 F-16s and E-3 surveillance aircraft and 4 KC-135 tankers in response. Okay, now Russian almost incursion or incursion into U.S. airspace, especially in Alaska. Yeah, this is nothing new, but we've got all these hotbeds in the world, the Middle East, Russia, Ukraine, various NATO members wanting to invoke Article 4. And now is Putin trying to test the limits of even America itself. And indeed, when I saw this, I thought to myself, it was just a few short weeks ago, Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin were in Alaska trying to negotiate some kind of a peace, some kind of a process to end the Russia-Ukraine conflict. And now it just seems to be getting bigger. Okay, and along with that, there are a number of stories which should very much grab our attention. Okay, this is one of the first ones. I saw report this. Open source intel today, 9:41 a.m. Washington Post, Secretary of War Pete Hegseth calls a rare, urgent meeting of hundreds of generals and admirals at Quantico, Virginia, Tuesday. Okay, we're in the middle of 10 days of all, ladies and gentlemen. Not only are we in the middle of 10 days of all, but we've got Yom Kippur coming up. And here, Secretary of War, Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth calls a major meeting of U.S. generals and admirals at Quantico. Okay, so there's some more information on this. This is what Benny Johnson forwarded on. Breaking. Secretary of War Pete Hegseth calls a rare, urgent meeting of hundreds of generals and admirals. I don't know what the exact number is, but yeah, this is going to be on September the 30th in Quantico. That's on Tuesday. Today's Thursday, so that's in 5 days. And hundreds of generals and has this ever happened before? I mean, why can't they just do some kind of a virtual thing? So, of course, along with that and these different things, particularly with Russia, Ukraine, people are definitely wondering, okay, what is getting ready to happen? Or what I think is far more likely, are we going to see a level of tension among the great powers, which has not been seen since, say, the Cuban Missile Crisis? That, I think, is far more likely. But indeed, how many people are just in their own little worlds? They're sucking off all of the crap on social media, like this Netanyahu thing on South Park, and they're not taking the world situation seriously. There are a lot of things I hope your Messianic congregation or synagogue is going to be praying about with Yom Kippur coming up. I mean, Yom Kippur is a day of atonement. A lot of people who look at the future prophetic fulfillment of the fall high holidays, they think about Yom Kippur in association with, that point event day of the Lord and the final battle of Armageddon and everything. That's what it tends to be associated with. Well, we possibly have some previews of that occurring in our world right now. Okay, from Open Source Intel Defender, these are our last two stories. This is from today at 10:45 a.m. You can read all this in your spare time, but NATO allies are divided over whether the alliance should make it a policy to shoot down Russian fighter jets that violate NATO's airspace, with some countries, including the United States, Poland, and the Baltic states, signaling that future violations should be met with force, while others, including Germany, urge more restraint from allies, according to CNN. And of course, this has to do with Estonia, it has to do with Poland, it has to do with some of these incursions by Russia with their drones and with their air force. And now we possibly even have one in U.S. airspace, in Alaska. Okay, now I didn't plan it this way, but this was the last story I added to our list before going live. We started with Sergei Lavrov, and we're going to end with Sergei Lavrov. So this is from Open Source Intel Defender today at 10:55 a.m. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov states that NATO and the European Union have declared war on Russia through Ukraine, according to Russian state media outlet TASS. Okay. So we are at a very unstable point with Western-Russian relations. And indeed, I got nothing against the people of Russia. I think it's just absolutely shameful that, 24 years ago after 9/11 and in some of the years after that, I mean, Western-Russian relations are getting really, really close to the point where it was even speculated that Russia itself may end up joining NATO. But we're not there right now. Russia has been pushed more into the eastern sphere of influence. And indeed, there are many things which require our prayers and intercession. So, pray for peace, Israel, Gaza, release of the hostages, the Middle East. Number two, pray for peace, Russia, Ukraine, that this conflict is deflated, not intensified. And number three, pray for the uncertainty here on the American home front. Yes, people are still talking about the death of Charlie Kirk, but we've got things, Russiagate, Epstein, Biden's auto pen, whatever it is, that people are going to be talking about. And we are in the middle of the fall high holidays. And I sincerely hope and pray that your Messianic congregational leader, rabbi, pastor, whomever, is at least making some kind of passive reference to this, that we live in an uncertain world and, we need to entreat our God. As always, on behalf of Outreach Israel Ministries and Messianic Apologetics, I would like to sincerely thank you for your ongoing prayers, encouragement, and support for all of our ministry efforts. If you have not, please do visit our website, messianicapologetics.net. There you can access free articles, frequently asked questions entries, back issues of Outreach Israel News, and of course, you can look up different back episodes of Messianic Insider, different McKee moment shorts, etc. We'll see you again tomorrow with another episode of Messianic Insider. Until then, may God bless you, shalom, and take care.